Welcome to Podcasting for Financial Professionals. I'm your host, Virginia Elder, podcast manager and founder of Podcast Abundance. If you've ever dreamed of becoming a published author but don't have time to write the book yourself, this episode is for you. My guest, Lynn Smargis of Publishing for Professionals, is a ghostwriter and editor who helps experts like you turn outlines and ideas into published books that build serious authority. Let's get into it. Thank you, Lynn, for being here with me today. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Well, thanks for having me, Virginia. I'm so excited to be here and chat about books and writing.
Perfect. Something that is on a lot of financial professionals' minds is this need or feeling like they need to write a book. So you are the perfect guest to fill us all in on the process and the positioning and how to actually make this book become reality.
Yeah. So do we want to talk about the purpose first or the process first?
Let's talk about the purpose and the positioning, because the same thing happens with podcasts, right? Somebody's like, I want to have a podcast. I want to talk about all these 5 things, and only 2 of them might have to do with my business, but I'm passionate. So things get muddled and confused easily in any kind of publishing space, unless you have someone that's really coaching you on honing in. What is the point? What is the purpose? How is this thing that you're going to publish really going to help you and help your business? So if you'll just walk us through a couple of the different thought processes on how do we decide what we're going to write a book about?
That is one of the first questions I ask people in the discovery calls. What is your topic of your book? And sometimes people are like, well, I want to write a memoir, but I don't know what parts of my life I want to write about. And some people want to write about their business expertise, but they're not sure what angle to write it or specifically who to write it for. So a couple of the things you always want to consider when you're just thinking about writing a book is, first of all, you want to think about what is the purpose of your book? So is the purpose of your book, you just want to leave a memoir to your kids and grandkids so people can read about you after you pass away? Or is the purpose of your book to be a lead magnet for your business, whereas you are going to be speaking, or even if you're not a speaker, you're just meeting with clients and you send them a book, or you do workshops and you give people books that are signed that makes you look like and be an expert in your field, especially if it's a crowded vertical like finance. Like, books are a great way to separate yourself from everybody else. Or are you making your book for profit, almost purely for profit, and you want to be seen as a Amazon best-selling published author? So there's many different reasons other than that you can write your book, but those are typically the 3 biggest reasons that I come across, and I do all nonfiction writing. Fiction is completely different, so I'm definitely not going to jump into that because I'm not an expert in fiction writing. I am writing a fiction book myself, but it's my first book, and I'm super excited about it, and it's really fun. I'm actually collaborating with a fellow writer on this project, but first thing you need to decide is, what is your purpose? Like, why do you want to write this book? And you need to be really clear about that, because if you're not really clear about why you're writing this book, then you won't know where to take the book with the content piece, right? So like, if you're writing it as a lead magnet or a calling card, then you want to put a lot of educational information in there, because you want to show people, look, this is what I know. This is what I can help you with. These are the type of people I help. And so if you're writing it for a memoir, then you want it to be really personal. You might want to add a lot of pictures in it because it's a memoir. So there's a lot of different aspects that you can take it depending on what the purpose is. But you need to be really clear on your purpose before you start writing your book, because that's going to affect where your content is going, as far as how you're going to be writing your content, what voice you're going to be writing it in, and what type of content you'll be putting in your book.
Well, and along those same lines, let's just clarify. Most people who write a book do not become uber successful off of the sales of the book. Most of the time, except for the very few that are top charts, bestsellers, selling a bazillion books because they're doing a ton of PR, and maybe they were, champion of the Survivor TV show or something like that. Like there's some other notoriety that they've had before they became an author, and that's why they're selling books and making millions. But most people are normal, maybe a couple thousand followers. If you have a business that has a large client base already, that's kind of a plus, because then you've already got people who are used to giving you money in exchange for something. so let's just talk through, like, what's the typical person doing with their book and how is it affecting their business when we think about a financial professional. Maybe they're a real estate guru, maybe they're a financial advisor, maybe they're a money coach, maybe they're a CPA, just kind of your typical professional that writes a book. What do they do with it and how do they get it out there?
So having a book, especially if you're in a crowded space like financial or health and wellness or anything like that, really sets you aside from everybody else. Because out of everybody that thinks about writing a book, 80% of people don't even pick up a pen or pencil or start typing. So you're just writing your book, you're already in that top 10, 20, 15% of people who are writing a book who, no one else is. And then once people start writing a book, then only a certain percent of those people actually get to the manuscript part. And then a certain percent of those people actually get to publish their book. So you're like in the top 2 to 5% of people in your space if you have written and published a book. So that in and of itself puts you in a very special place. And the other thing about writing and publishing a book is that people, no matter where you're at, and I've written 4 books at this point. So when I go out, and I travel, I take a copy of my book, The Guide to Traveling Gluten-Free. So my Travel Gluten-Free podcast is a hobby podcast, but I wrote this book to help other people who also have food allergies and travel. So I always take a couple copies with me and I'll sign and give it to a flight attendant or somebody else who's like, oh yeah, I'm celiac too. I'm like, oh, here's my book and listen to my podcast. And it's almost like you become an instant rock star, Virginia. Like people are like, oh my gosh, you actually wrote this book. And I'm like, yes, this is my book. And the other thing they're impressed with is if you have, and this was before AI, but if you have written it based on personal experience and you didn't just do an armchair writing, which is what we call it in the publishing industry, where you just researched online and put a bunch of stuff together. The other thing is that you don't want to use AI to exclusively write your book. I know there's a lot of people, and I see a lot of commercials on YouTube now that are like, you can take the software program and it will write you an entire ebook using AI in just a few minutes. Well, there's several problems with that. One is that any book that AI writes is going to be copyright infringed, which means you will be legally liable and can get sued for anything you put in that book because it's pulling from other people's content. That is not a place you want to be. Second of all, AI does not write good content. It's usually really dry. So if you want to put together a really bad, poorly written book, that's a perfect way to ruin your reputation and just put out a very low quality book, if that's what you want to do. The other thing is what people don't understand is writing a book is more about just using AI and throwing together some content. Writing a book is about the passion, when you read a book, right, you can tell if somebody's really passionate about a subject by the way they write their book. And so if you just slap together a book using AI and you haven't put any of yourself into the book, when people read that, they will recognize it and they will be like, wow, this isn't really that great. And the other thing that I always advise people on is that if you do write it yourself, which is perfectly fine, like anybody can write their own book, but you want to get a professional editor. Because I cannot tell you, Virginia, how many times I've been either A, part of a beta reader group, or B, have purchased a book off the shelf someone has published. Like, perfect example, I was at a keynote a few months ago, and the person that did the keynote seemed like a really awesome, professional who knew what she was doing and blah, blah, blah. So she had a book and she put it up on the screen. So I purchased the book and I read it. And literally the first 2 pages, I just saw at the top, 6 grammar mistakes. And then there was formatting issues where there's huge spaces and not enough room. And then she had 26 chapters and one chapter was 1 page. And I just really lost a lot of respect for that person because I thought, okay, if you're telling me you're making 7 figures, why couldn't you spend $3,000 for an editor? So yeah, there's a lot of different aspects you really need to look at when you're writing a book. It's not just about having the content, but it's about putting yourself out in a professional manner where it actually enhances your reputation online and in person and not does the opposite and negates your reputation in person or online.
No, I think that's a really important point that runs really parallel with what I do. Of course, like anything that you're publishing, you want it to enhance your reputation. You said it perfectly. So why would you know, slap together an unedited episode and push it out there, essentially like you recorded it live with background noise and all kinds of issues? Same thing with a book. If you're going to take the time and thought process to put something together, slow down the whole thing and take the time and money to hire a ghostwriter, hire an editor, hire a publisher. Like, it's either going to increase or diminish your professional positioning. So you've got to put some thought into that. So when we think about the process of writing a book, how much does someone need to have ready to go or have already thought through what they want this to be about? Or like, what do they kind of need to bring to the table initially if they were to say, hey, Lynn, I want to write a book. I want you to be my ghostwriter. What do you need? Where do we start?
So when people come to me, they actually only need an idea of like basically what they want to write, because in my ghostwriting, what I also include is I also include book coaching, which means I actually literally walk people through the entire process and while I'm writing their book for them with coaching, like as in what content they can put in a chapter, what content's better off in a different chapter, like, and I also do all of the editing. So I work with people, and a lot of what I work with people with too is imposter syndrome. Like a lot of people ask me like, oh, is this good enough? Do you think this is going to sell? Do you think people will be interested in it? Do you think anybody except my mom's going to read this? Typically, the answer is yes, because if somebody really wants to write a book, they're very passionate about something, and typically they are an expert in the field that they want to write about. Out of all the people I've written a book for, there's only one person who I was writing the book, and I was like, "Oh, I don't think this is a good like." Does not, it's not going to appeal to anybody except rich people who are very spoiled, and which is not 90% of us. So, but for most of my clients, they are experts in their field. They're CEOs, they're executives, or speakers, or consultants, and they want to just show that they are in a separate category than everybody else with having a book. So when I write with people, I always start with, what is the purpose of your book? Like, who is your avatar? Like, who are you speaking to? So that we not only know like where the content is going, but how to direct it properly towards their audience so that when that avatar picks up the book, they will be able to relate to the information. They're going to be able to understand it in a way that is at whatever level they're at, whether they're writing for beginner, intermediate, or expert, depending on what type of avatar you have. That's going to really decide like how we're going to write the book, right? I take all of that into consideration while I'm working with somebody. So you only need an idea when you come to me, because we flesh out, once we have your idea, we have your purpose, and we know your avatar, then we start on your outline, because you never want to write a book without an outline. I know some people who have done that, like started their book, and I'm like, oh, well, what is your outline? Like, what's your topic? What's your purpose? And they don't know, and they're just writing. And I always recommend against that for a couple of different reasons. One is because you're not going to have a good finished product at the end if you don't have a roadmap, right? It's like trying to drive somewhere and not knowing where you're going and not using Google Maps or a paper map. You're going to get there eventually, but it's going to take you 20 times longer. The second reason is because if you don't have a roadmap on what you're going to write, and every person I've worked with has changed their roadmap. Like, we move chapters, we've moved content, we've moved all sorts of different things. But if you don't have a roadmap, you're not going to be clear on what it is that you're writing about. So your book's not going to appeal to the people that you want it to appeal to, and take longer to do. And you're going to have a lot of extra content that you've written that isn't going to apply to your book. So you've just wasted that time. So you always want to know your purpose, know who your avatar is, and then have a clear outline, even though you're going to change your outline eventually a little bit here and there, which is not a big deal. Because I tell people, writing a book is an art process, just like podcasting, right? You go along, you find out what works organically. And it's always like, it's really funny because you know this as well as I do, Virginia. We can put out a podcast episode and be like, okay, this is just a basic episode, whatever. And you put it out and people love it and it gets like 500 views. And then you're like, oh, I'm going to really craft this XYZ podcast episode. And you put it out and it gets 100 views. So you just never know what people are really going to go for until you start putting out that content. But just, making sure you at least have a purpose and outline and to work with that way you can always adjust and do something a little bit different, but that you have that basis to work on. So you're not wasting your time, money, and or efforts in writing the book.
Yeah, I would think it's kind of easy to get lost in like the circular, like, wait, did I already say that? Or did I already use that example? Or, well, I was talking about that here, but now I want to go here with that point. And you could very easily get lost. Even, I'll say just with my own show, and I do this with client shows too, I will pull up the list of all their episodes and scan through the titles looking for, have we talked about this before? And if so, what did we title that episode? Because we don't want anything even remotely similar to that title. And we're really always trying to make each piece of content stand out, stand alone, and not be repetitive, even if it's related. So an outline would really, really help with that. And talk to me a little bit about ghostwriting versus editing. And to you, that's probably really clear, but to someone who's never written a book or hasn't gotten into the process, they might be like, well, when do I need a ghostwriter versus when do I need an editor? Like, what's the difference?
So one of the benefits of working with me is that I actually do both. So a lot of people, well, here, let me back up a little bit. Most writers are not ghostwriters because most writers do not like ghostwriting. It is a very intimate process. Like, you get to know the other person really well. You end up partially becoming their therapist because at some point in the process, usually 5 or 6 months down the road, you get on the call and they start just venting to you first, which I just expect now. So I'm like, okay, and I just sit and listen. And, if they want my advice, I give my advice. Sometimes they just need me to listen, but you're working with this person, like very intimately on something that you're passionate about, that you're very close to. So you always want to pick somebody that you really like personality wise, because if you don't like them personality wise, it's going to be a dumpster fire and living hell for you and trying to work with this person. But with the ghostwriting process, the difference between ghostwriting and editing is that ghostwriting is the actual process of writing your rough draft for your book. Once you have your rough draft finished, then you can take it and bring it to an editor who's going to there's many different forms of editing. There's line editing where you're editing line by line and editing the words and phrases to make it sound better. There's organizational editing, which is literally how it sounds like oh, this is out of timeline, so this needs to go here. Or, oh, you said this in this chapter and you also said this here, so we need to delete it in one place. There's grammar editing. There's like 6 different kinds of editing that you can do. And so what I do with my clients, because I do ghostwriting and editing. So editing is actually the part of making your book polished and sound really nice. Ghostwriting is getting the content down and writing the rough draft up. And so once you get done the editing process, then you have a final manuscript that you can publish after you do, but then you have to do formatting. But what I do for my clients is that we write the rough draft together. And as my client is finishing up the rough draft, I start at the top of their book and start editing their book while they're writing their rough draft. If they're writing the rough draft, sometimes I'm writing the rough draft and editing their book. So it just depends on what the client needs. But I can save my client a lot of time by doing that, because then we're simultaneously working on 2 different projects on the same book. And so their book gets done faster. And so that's one of the things I offer that other ghostwriters don't offer. And I also offer my clients, hey, if you do want a separate editor, because it's always a good idea to have a second set of eyes, I am part of a writers group that I have really great professional editors who I can refer them to if they want like a second eyes on to do some more editing after I edit, which is perfectly fine. I'm not when some writers are like, oh, this is my work and you shouldn't touch it at all. I'm like, I'm human and imperfect like everybody else. And I know I don't have, I have a different voice and writing style, but one of the things I do always do is try to do my best to make the book that I'm writing sound like the person, so that if someone's listening to the podcast and they read their book, or someone's reading their blog and they listen to their book or read their book, there's not going to be a disconnect there. Like they're not going to be like, this sounds like a totally different person in the book than it does on the podcast. So I do my best to make it sure it sounds like the person as I'm doing the writing and or editing, and then it sounds like their voice, but it's also professionally written. So there's an art to that where it's like you don't want to change how they sound, but you also want to make them what I call sound smarter. It's not really sounding smarter, but it's like I write for a living, so I know what sounds good and what doesn't. And a lot of people write like they speak, which is normal for someone who's not a writer. So I take the speaking writing and make it reading writing.
So again, lots of parallels with the podcast editing space, right? I am encouraging people, if they're going to do scripting or outlining for their podcast episode, to write the way they speak so that when they're reading their script, it sounds like them, like organically, just naturally, as if you came up with those ideas on the spot, which we know you put thought into your script. So, but that's totally different when you write a book. You would not say some of the same slang or end your sentences with prepositions, just different things like that, to make yourself be this published author who has a professionally written book. You just would not want language like that in your published work.
And also too, just really quick, Virginia, in addition to the language piece, a lot of people think, oh, I have a blog or, oh, I have transcripts. I'll just copy and paste them and make them a book. And that's what's known in our industry as a blog book. It does not flow well because you can't just take content, copy and paste it and make a book. You can use your podcast content and take those transcripts and make them into a book. I'm doing that for a client now. He was interviewed on this podcast for like 2 hours. So he's taken the transcripts and cleaned them up. And then I'm going through and taking that and making it part of his book. And so there's a difference between having content and making book content.
Yes, yes. So you can use things that you've already created or interviews you've done or blogs you've written or maybe even like a newsletter series as inspiration and like baseline content to go into your book. I think that would be a really good strategy. If someone's listening to this show, I'm thinking they're interested in podcasting or they have a podcast or they want to start a podcast, and then maybe they've thought about a book as well. So that's one way of almost like streamlining the process. And I know you and I have talked before about, what can you do with all of this content and to be able to pull all the transcripts and let those inspire a book.
Yeah, you can actually go either way with that. So you can have a podcast. And what I do with podcasters is we make the outline and then we see what content is going to fit into their book. And we pull those episodes and make those chapters for their book. And then anything else we either write in or my client will like just audio record the chapter and then give me the transcript and I'll turn that into book speak. Or the other thing that I had one of my clients do is we made her outline. And then she had some chapters where she needed to fill in. So she actually made podcast episodes as chapters for her book for the intention of repurposing it for her book. But then you can also flip it. If you have a book, you can take those book chapters and you can make tons and tons of podcast episodes with the book chapters you already have. And one of the things I do with one of my books is I say, I'll read, like I'll have a podcast topic. And I'm like, this is from chapter 6 of my book, blah, blah, blah. And so people know, if I tell people, if you want to know more, go on Amazon and buy my book. So I also use my podcast for advertising my book. So a book and a podcast are really great complementary ways to get yourself more repurposed media that you're not necessarily having to recreate everything brand new.
That feels good. That feels like there's really no wrong way. Like, oh no, I started the podcast first, or oh no, I started the book first. Like just the fact that you can do it either way feels better. I don't know. Like there's just not a wrong approach. Let's circle back real quick. I was leading earlier toward like how do we get this book out there? And I know you're on the writer and editing side, you're not the PR person, you're not the marketing person. So let's highlight that that is a completely different role and it might be 5 different roles. But as someone's thinking, okay, great, Lynn's gonna write my book for me, editing, copy, like that sounds great. We're gonna get it published. We'll figure that out. Now, how do I get my book into people's hands? And there's a multitude of different ways to do that. Can you just name a few that would fit like the financial professional's life and practice if this book is to essentially give to potential clients to hopefully sell services eventually? Maybe they're going to invest with your firm or something. How do you get your book out there?
Yeah. So in the industry, we say writing the book is the easy part, marketing it is the hard part because marketing is a long-term game. Like you need to really pound the pavement with marketing. I mean, if you want to sell like a decent amount of your book, right? Like if you don't care about selling your book, like if you're just writing a memoir for your family, then the marketing part obviously doesn't matter. But if you do want to sell copies of your book and you want to sell a lot of it, there's several different ways that I always tell my clients they can do. And if they want assistance with marketing, I can do that. That's not my primary thing, but I can give them like a marketing plan. We can sit down and say like, what do you like to do for marketing, and help them set up something that works for what their style and personality is. Because a lot of people don't get on TikTok, or some people don't like YouTube or whatever, right? So I make a marketing plan that works for them, because if I make a marketing plan for them that has TikTok and they're like, I hate TikTok, they're never going to do it, right? So it's all about making something that they feel comfortable with. There's actually a couple really easy things off the top of my head. One of that my recent client's doing that wrote a memoir. He's 80 years old and publishing his first book, and it's going to be called Dreams Take Flight. Tom Schott is the author, and he just turned 80 this past February, publishing his first book. And he's the person responsible for disc golf being so big in the world, because he started world disc golf games in Santa Cruz, where he lived back in the 70s. So it's super cool to see all these old black and white photos of people throwing Frisbee and all this stuff. Anyway, my point is that I said, Tom, how are you planning on marketing your book? And he's like, oh, I'm going to all of these Frisbee and disc golf events, and I'm going to have a tent there, and I'm going to sell my book there. I'm like, that is perfect, because you want to go where your market is. And he's 80, right? So he's not big on technology, and he doesn't know how to use Zoom and all that stuff. I had to show him how to use Square to swipe a credit card. And I set him up with that in Venmo. So he does have all of those things now. But you have to work with people where they're at, right? Like I know he's not going to make a huge social media campaign, and I'm not going to expect him to. But I was telling him like, well, you can use your personal email to tell your friends about it, and definitely go to these events, because all the people in his book have events too. And he's very well connected in the industry. So perfect way is to go to an event that your book will, like FinCon, right? So if you're a financial person going to FinCon and selling your book, great idea. My first book I published, The Guide to Traveling Gluten-Free, I would go to gluten-free expos and sell copies of my book, because obviously everybody there was gluten-free or knew somebody who was gluten-free. So that's one thing, going to events where your customer avatar is going to be that wants to read that book. A second thing you can do that is super easy is to get on Alex Sanfilippo's Podmatch and to either trade with another podcaster, to do a podcast swap, and tell them be upfront that you have a book. And typically what you do is you talk about a topic, and then you pitch your book at the end so that people know. That's one of the best ways to sell your book, is to get on a podcast that has a similar avatar to who you're speaking to. And then another way is just through like your regular email campaign. If you can ideally start emailing people 3 months before you're planning on publishing it, and just give them like little snippets of like what's going to be in your book, or maybe like summarize a chapter and put it in an email and be like, hey, if you want to find out more, sign up on this form, and I will send you you'll get first dibs on whatever signed copy or something if you want to give them something special for buying your first book. So those are 3 easy ways. I mean, not easy because you obviously have to do the work, but 3 of the easier ways you can market your book to get it out there for people to know about it.
So then as a business owner, or even just in a C-suite position at, let's say, your financial practices firm, there is an email list. You have access to a wide variety of people's names and information. You can choose, like, are you going to just say, hey, I'll send you the book for free if you just pay for shipping? Like maybe there's some type of corporate event that you're going to throw. And, part of getting people to come to that event is the promise that they'll receive a copy of your book. Like there's so many different opportunities to be creative about how you get your book into people's hands. But I think the main one that I've seen just time and time again, and I've got to admit, like I've bought books from these types of events, is where they see you speak on stage. They like you. They enjoy your jokes. They, think, oh man, like, look, you're on stage wearing the sparkly dress. You must be somebody. And I'm going to buy your book at the back of the room when it's offered.
Right. Plus, they're so emotionally invested because you just got them all hyped up, right? Which is what speakers are supposed to do. And they're super excited. And we are emotional buyers. Like we buy with our emotion and then back it up with logical reason.
Yes. And I love the example that you shared about, doing a podcast swap or at least getting interviewed on podcasts, because for a while, I had to actually stop listening to podcasts for just my own personal entertainment because I would buy anything that they were selling. I was like, yo, you have to stop. Like, I'm glad that you're invested in this, but you can't buy all their
that's
books.
The thing with podcasting. We both know, right, Virginia, is like when you're listening to someone's voice, you get so connected with them. You almost feel like, oh, you're talking to a friend, right? Or you're listening to a friend. And so it's so easy to make that emotional connection and then boom, and then you're buying something from them because they've already set up that trust factor, right? And then another great way too, I just thought of is doing workshops. And that's also a really great way to also sell online courses is that people will do a workshop on a particular topic and they're like, oh, if you want more information, buy my book or sign up for the course. And so that's another like easier, quote unquote, way to market your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned earlier you personally have published 4 books, or you're working, I think, on your 4th, but you're not counting tons of clients' books that you have written and been a part of. And then you also have a couple of podcasts. So let's dive into your background a little bit and talk to us about your shows. You've mentioned the gluten-free thing. I know that's been a life journey of yours and a passion project of yours. But share a little bit more about your shows. And then since you're so experienced, what are some tips?
Yeah. So my first show I came out with was Travel Gluten Free, and I came out with that in 2018. And I actually did it with Podcast Movement's 30-day podcast challenge on Facebook. And I got my first podcast out in 30 days. And the only reason I got it out in 30 days, and the reason I decided to start podcasting is I need to give a shout out to Chris Nessie. I was a science STEM teacher, and I was also a technology coach in the school district I was in. And Chris and I were connected on when X used to be Twitter. We used to have educational technology coaches meet up on Twitter. And so that's how I met Chris. And Chris was already into podcasting and had been for several years. And I was speaking at an international teachers conference on the East Coast, and he lived in New Jersey. So he came across the bridge. We were sitting there having margaritas, and he says, well, tell me about this blog idea you have. I'm like, well, it's Travel Gluten Free, and I want to do a blog first, and then I'm going to turn it into a podcast. He's like, well, why don't you do a podcast first? And I was like, well, why would I want to do a podcast first? He's like, there's 4 million blogs and 250,000 podcasters. I'm like, good point. I'll do a podcast first. So that's how I started Travel Gluten Free. And I started that because I found out I had celiac disease, and I was traveling there's a big road out west here called the Pacific Coast Highway, and it's Route 1, and it goes all the way from Southern California all the way to Northern Washington. And I did that 3-week road trip, and I was by myself. And when I get sick from celiac disease, it's like a cross between food poisoning and the flu. And I was just sitting there at a gas station realizing, if I get sick, how am I going to take care of myself? Like, it's not easy to when you get a reaction because it's autoimmune. And so anyway, I thought, God, there's got to be something out there. I looked, I couldn't find any resources. Like all I could find was here's 50 restaurants in New York, but like nobody taught you how to pack your bag when you have food and you're flying, or like what to take with you on a road trip, or what's the easiest way to travel when you have a food allergy, which amazingly enough is cruising. You would think all that food, it's not, but they're very service oriented. And I found out the cruise lines to go with and the cruise lines that will still give you allergen, not friendly food. And I've gotten sick on cruises from that. And I've also gotten food poisoned on a cruise from celebrity. So don't ever take celebrity. So Dutch travel gluten-free. I have a couple that I've archived. I have another one called Caring for Your Aging Parents. And I have that one to promote my book, Sensible Senior Solutions. So it's for people like us who are in the 30 to 60 age range, who have parents that are getting older, who need to be taken care of. So the first half of that book talks about the different types of care, whether that's in-home care, retirement living, whatever you're looking for your parent. The second half is how to pay for it, because we all know those services need to be paid for money, because you're not going to get them for free unless you're on Medicaid. So that Caring for Your Aging Parents was one of my most phenomenal podcasts, because I got 20 calls off of that podcast, which was because people are always looking for information for caring for their parents, because there's too much information out there. And a lot of it is just people trying to sell you things. I mean, I was trying to sell you a book, but it's actually good information. And then the newest one I had come out is called Publishing for Professionals. And that's obviously for my ghostwriting business. I have episodes on there on how to write and publish your book. So I do solo episodes on that. And then I also have guests come on. And like my one guest talked about branding with your book. And my other guest talked about, he was my voiceover for my audiobook for Sensible Senior Solutions. So Trenton came on and talked about what you need to know about publishing an audiobook. So it's all the different publishing aspects. And I'm also talk about like AI and how to use AI with your book and how not to use AI with your book. And so it's really to help the executives, coaches, consultants, and speakers who are looking to write a book, but they don't know where to start, or they're unsure of like how to write an outline or any type of that kind of thing. So that's Publishing for Professionals. And that's my most recent podcast, which now has about 15, 20 episodes.
So let this episode just be like a taste of how Lynn can help you. And obviously you've got podcasting for financial professionals. And then if you really truly are interested in writing that book, then hop over to Publishing for Professionals. It's so funny. We both just, didn't talk about it, but we've come up with very similar names for our shows.
Yeah, and we actually rebranded at the same exact time, because originally I had a different name for my podcast, and because I just started it this past January, and then I saw your email that you had rebranded, and I was like, oh my gosh, I picked almost the same exact name.
Same thing, yeah. Yeah, I love that though. It shows you, it's that old phrase, great minds think alike. So.
Absolutely, 110%.
That's funny. So through all of your, different topics and genres that you've written for, created podcast episodes for, created shows for, do you have any tips for these financial professionals that are looking at the podcasting space? What should they not do and completely avoid? What are something that, made your life easier, even though you're juggling multiple shows at once? Like, give us some tips.
So first tip would be hire a VA to help you with any type of task that you can offload off your plate. And one of the things that I found is that for me, it's very effective for me to create the content, put it in folders, and then have my VA distribute it along the channels, because I don't need to distribute it along the channels. That's an easy task I can pass off to my VA. I also have her do certain things with like make appointments and reminding me with Google calendars and things like that. So having a VA really takes a lot off your plate, and it's really a good investment, because then you get to work on networking and working on your business instead of working in your business. Another thing I would say is, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, one of the best ways to find out if you're ready for a podcast is just to come up with what ideas are you going to have for a show, right? So what I tell people is, with their book, is what are the biggest pain points of your clients? And then niche that down to like even smaller topics. And if you can come up with 30 or 40 topics, then you're ready to do a podcast. If you can only come up with 10, then you either need to hire somebody to help you come up with more ideas, or you shouldn't start a podcast. So I tell people those two things. The other thing is, you need to know why you're doing your podcast, just like a book, right? So if you want to be the expert, you want most of your podcast episodes to be solos. You want just a few to be interviews. So like for mine, it's about 4 solos to 1 interview. One of my clients, who I've edited 2 of his books now, he has a podcast where he wants to be seen as the expert, but he always does interviews. So I told him, I said, Alex, you need to stop doing interviews and start doing solo shows, because your podcast guests or your podcast listeners aren't seeing you as the expert. They're seeing your guest as the expert. And that's why you're not getting leads off your podcast. So if you want to increase your network, having a show where you have people on as guests is a really great way to do that. If you want to show yourself as the expert, then you want to do mostly solo shows. So sometimes people just want to get into podcasting because they think they can just make a lot of money off podcasting because they see the Joe Rogans and all that stuff. And it's just like books, right? Like, oh, it's really sexy to be selling $1 million in books when you're an A-lister. But if you're not an A-lister, you're not Michelle Obama selling her book, you're probably not going to make $1 million. So while the sexy and fast part is really exciting, it doesn't happen for most people, as we know, and we need to be realistic with our expectations. So that's another thing, is just to be really realistic with your podcast expectations, not to be like, oh, well, so-and-so has got like 1 million downloads a month. Well, that's the top 0.2% of podcasters, right? The chances you're going to get that are probably slim and none. Not that means that you're not going to, but don't expect that, right? Go into it expecting to grow slowly and organically.
And knowing that, hey, you probably don't need 1 million people to listen to your show. Like, you only need, a couple hundred, because a percentage of those become clients. And how many new clients do you want? And like, you can kind of back into some of the math, as I'm sure you also could when it comes to how many people's hands do you need to get your book into, right? You don't probably have to sell 1 million copies. So it's just realizing the purpose, the point, and then doing that math game to figure out how many people really need this, how many people really need to listen.
And the other thing I would tell people, and I know you do a good job of this, Virginia, is you need to write excellent show notes that have keywords in them. Because I have come across podcasters who are like, oh, I don't need to write show notes, I'll just put the transcript up. But the problem with that is that you're not going to get, like when I used to write show notes for a living years ago, when I wrote show notes for people, their podcasts would always rank higher than their website because they were constantly putting out good, fresh material. And those show notes are so important for discoverability and to like rank higher on Google. So always, always, always put effort into your show notes and have Virginia write your show notes. Don't try to do it on your own.
Thank you. Thank you for that plug. Yeah, that's a super important piece. And there are full episodes on this show about show notes. There's a show notes template on my website if you insist on doing them yourself. But, there's guidance out there available, and or services, of course. So, Lynn, as we think about, okay, gosh, I have to keep putting consistent stuff on my website. I want to write a book. I want to start a podcast. It just seems like there's so many different directions that we're all pulled in. And I know you feel it too, because you're everywhere too. So how do we manage all this feeling of being pulled everywhere? Do you have any tips on that? Because that's kind of the thing that I'm thinking in the back of my head. Like, somebody's listening to this show thinking, I want to start a podcast. Oh, wait, a book sounds really good. Oh, wait, like how much can I handle on my plate? How do I do this? So what are your tips?
I'm so glad you asked me that, Virginia, because I just came up with a method for myself that I am now introducing to clients. And
Awesome.
so what I'm doing is I am writing a book on how to hire a ghostwriter. And what I've done is I've broken that book up into 52 articles that I'm publishing on my Substack, which is also called Publishing for Professionals.
Cool.
And when I get done writing those 52 articles that I'm also publishing on Substack, that I'm also repurposing as my posts on LinkedIn and also in my emails and other things and blogs. So not only am I using that content for my book, but as I'm building my book content, I'm using that for my social. So I'm doing all of the things at once by writing my book and making it into 52 articles. So if that's something that somebody would like to do, I could totally help them with that, because I've set up the whole structure for my platform and I've been doing this for 5 months now, and it's been working really well because you always have consistent content and you're building your book at the same time. Because it's like, why not do backward design and kill two birds with one stone and get everything done at once? I mean, obviously, you're going to have to repurpose and put that content, write your content and then repurpose it. That's a great use for AI. If you have the content you've written and then you put it in AI and say, hey, turn the Substack article into 2 LinkedIn posts, boom, you've got it. So that's a great use of it. But yeah, I can teach people how to do that and with a topic for every 52 weeks and all of that stuff. So it really cuts down the time where you're not like, okay, this is my podcast episode and this is this and this is that, because you can take those articles and also make them into podcast episodes. So it's a really great way to start with a purpose for the year and have your whole marketing plan laid out with your content with one, and write your book at the same time.
Yeah. And using the initial like piece of content per week for multiple different publish places, right? Even if it's not like, let's say your book isn't being published week by week, but you are building that content out. And you could even, like you said, you could put that into YouTube videos, into podcast episodes. Like you can really start with one piece of content and push it everywhere and streamline your efforts to where you're not creating 10 different pieces of content every week. You're creating one and then using AI or, even just taking excerpts out of it for different posts. And yeah, there's just a really beautiful bit of streamlining that's done there when you have that plan from the top. That's really cool.
And what I always tell people too is when they're writing their content, don't write it directly in the social post or directly in whatever, like write it in Google Docs, because you can take that content and then repurpose it for book marketing material when you do publish your book.
That's true. Well, yeah. And I just did an episode, by the time people are hearing this, they'll have to go back into the archives a little bit, but it's about scripting your episode and making it sound like you. And there's a little bit about AI in there and like how to make it sound like you. And what I love about being able to do that is, sure, you get your final script out of AI, you tweak it a little bit, just to take out some of the delve and, a gold mine of this and that, like all those things that are so AI. But by the time you get done with that, then you have this amazing piece of content that then it knows what it just created, right? So you can tell it, hey, I need 2 newsletter blurbs, 4 social media posts, a blog for my website. Like you could just tell it all the different places you want to repurpose it. And
yeah, like when I ask it to do LinkedIn, I say write a LinkedIn post with emojis so that it knows to put, because that's what you typically see on LinkedIn. So you have to be very, very specific with how you want it to write your stuff, because if you're not, it's just going to sound really dry and boring. So yeah, be very, very detailed and specific with telling the AI what voice and style you want it to rewrite your content.
So Lynn, you've been doing something else really cool, which is building a membership group for people who want to write a book. So could you tell us a little bit about that group and what's going on in there? Obviously, you're going to help us write a book in a group setting, but give me more detail.
The group is called Publishing for Professionals. So the podcast is called the same thing, but this is the Publishing for Professionals community. And it's a brand new community that I've just opened up. And it is for consultants, speakers, executives, C-suite people who are looking to write a book and would like book support. And so when you come into the group, it's basically, there's going to be like some resources, freebie resources and things in there. But the membership also includes a weekly Q&A where you can submit your question ahead of time, and then I answer it for you on a weekly Q&A call, so that not only do you have the resources and things like that, you can also like purchase courses, whatever, but that you have a weekly Q&A call live where you have access to me and you can ask a professional ghostwriter any questions you have about writing, publishing, editing, whatever it is. So it's a really good, useful thing because you can do it at your own pace. So if you want to go faster, you can go faster. If you want to write your book slower, you can do that. If you want to take more time, or if you just want to figure out if you want to write a book, right? It's a good entry-level place to come in and figure out, do you really want to write a book? Do you want to put the time and effort into it? And if so, what is that going to look like? And I can help you shape that, because most people get stuck at the beginning. Like, do I want to write a book? And if I do, where am I going to start? So this membership is really great for fleshing that out. So if you want to come in and either flesh that out, or you're writing a book and you want support, it's good for any level of membership because it's a fluid membership. So anybody at any level, if you're editing your book, writing your book, just starting, can come in and get benefit from the membership group Publishing for Professionals.
That is awesome. So I'm definitely going to drop a link in the show notes for y'all to check out Publishing for Professionals. You should be able to remember the name because it's so similar to my show name. So I love that. And it does. It sounds really useful. I'm thinking even if I were to sit down and say, like, let me write an outline for what I want my book to be, I would struggle with that. And so this would be the perfect spot, I think, for me to come and just check in with Lynn each week and be like, hey, what do you think about this? And I'm stuck here. And what do I do? And I think you'd be a really amazing guide. And I'm excited to see that membership grow.
And I would like to offer that membership free for your listeners. So if someone is listening, I will give you a special link, Virginia, just for your listeners that can come in and get the membership for free.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And real quick before we go, aside from that link, where can people find and follow you just to keep up with all of your podcasts and books and all of the different things that you do?
So the best place to find me is my website, and that is writeforyou.me. So it's WRITEFORYOU.ME. It's not the .com. Someone else had the .com. But writeforyou.me, you can see the books that I've helped other people publish. I've actually written more books than that, but not all my clients have published their books. But you can see the books that I've published. You can see other like content pieces that I've done on my website. You can read my blog for information. And there's also a link to my podcast there too.
Thank you so much for all your knowledge and sharing everything with us today. And I'm just going to encourage people to check you out and think what your business could look like if you had a published book. Thank you, Lynn.
Thanks. This has been a great experience coming on your podcast, Virginia. I appreciate you having me on your show as a guest.
Absolutely. Thank you.